Hello, everybody. It is me, Miss Gabby, and today we will be learning a very fun topic called genetics. Now, not a lot of people know about this, but don't worry because you will be one of the few. So, genetics is a very interesting topic and it does have a little bit of complicated stuff, but don't worry, we'll get through it. So, in today's class, we're going to look at genetics, what genetics is, the second part of genetics, traits, genotype versus phenotype, heredity, Punnett squares, Gregor Mendel, uh, alleles and alleles part 2, and last but not least, heterozygous, homozygous, and dihybrid. So here's a little friend Tommy, and you might feel like him. He doesn't know what are genetics and he needs to prepare because when he grows up, he's going to be a pretty big role in the human body. Why? Let's find out. Before we find anything out, first we need to know what genetics are. So, these are some keywords that we will use while talking about genetics. Genetics have proteins and amino acids, the ones that send messages throughout our body of how our DNA should be coded. So, proteins are very, very important because they make your traits come out more specially. And I'm guessing some of you have sometimes heard your grandmom say, you gotta eat some meat if you want your nails to be pretty, or if you want your hairs, especially for girls. And that is because the proteins help the DNA become more seeable and healthy. Also, cells. Cells are the building blocks of life. There are different types of cells, such as animal cells, plant cells, neuron cells, blood cells, and so on. If you don't know much about this, I recommend you go onto my video about cells. Now, the cell has something that is very important, and that's the nucleus. It's kind of like the center. So, this is where genetic information is stored inside a cell. In the nucleus, that little dot inside, you guys can store your DNA, and that's where you're basically, or your body is basically saying, hey, Tommy's gonna have black hair, or he's gonna have green eyes. So that's pretty interesting. Now, if you think about it this way, there are hundreds of millions of cells inside your body, and each contains DNA. So imagine how much DNA you have inside all your body. That's a lot. Anyways, we're also going to look at chromosomes, which is our friend Tommy. And chromosomes are the coding particles inside the nucleus that contain the DNA. Now, that was a little bit of a lot. Let me explain. There is a nucleus, and inside the nucleus, we have chromosomes. Inside each chromosome, they can be seen as X or Y, there's the DNA. So the DNA isn't directly inside the nucleus, it's inside the chromosomes. Now, I've been talking a lot about DNA, but what is DNA? DNA is where the amino acids and the proteins code your genetic information due to heredity. What is heredity before we continue? It's what traits you have from your mom and dad. So let's say if your dad had green eyes and your mom had brown eyes, you're probably going to have brown eyes. But why not green eyes? Stick to the end to find out. Now, genes are tiny segments of your DNA that handle a specific trait, eye color, or even hair color. So those were some examples. Then we're going to move on into genetics part 2. The basic scales from biggest to smallest Of course, the cell is very, very small. It's almost smaller than a piece of rice, a single piece. So, we're not talking about very big quantities here. Now, we have our cell, and inside our cell is the nucleus. Inside the nucleus is the chromosome. Then inside the chromosome is the DNA. And inside the DNA, there's these genes, which are segments of DNA. Now let's look at traits. Traits are the things that make you be like you. Your eye color, your skin color, so on. You could go from really notable things to things that aren't really notable. For example, something that's not very noticeable is if you can make your tongue into a W. Sadly, I can't, but some people can. But some things that are more visible, let's say, are the shape of your ears or your chin. Okay. So you inherit these things from your parents. So if you want to have blue eyes, but your mom and dad have black eyes, I'm sorry. Okay. There are two types of traits. There is the recessive trait, which overpowers less of your genetic code. Then there's dominant traits. So these overpower more of your genetic code. So let's see this more simply. Dominant is something that's stronger. Recessive is something that's smaller. So if you have dominant traits of something, you're probably going to have that. Now, of course, if there are two recessives, you will be able to maybe, possibly, have that recessive trait in you. Now, to the right of the screen, you can see some examples of traits, dominant and recessive. So there's cliff chin and no cliff chin. Then there's the widow's peak, and then the no widow's peak, and so on. I'll let you see that for a moment. Okay, let's continue. Then let's look at genotype versus phenotype. Your genetic code that is not seen, that is your genotype. So it's normally very recessive. Let's say there's this girl, her name's Jenny. Now, her genetic code is BB. So the big B equals brown eyes in dominant. The small b equals blue eyes in recessive. So the genotype is blue eyes because, well, you can't really see Jenny with blue eyes. But because B is more dominant, well, it's going to be a phenotype. So here you can see in her DNA that different bars represent different things. So blue eyes and brown eyes. Then another example of phenotype is our genetic code that is in fact seen in the outside. So let's say our friend Natasha, she has FF in her genetic code. She's got free earlobes, which is the phenotype because it's dominant. If we go back over here, we can see, well, I'm not very sure if you can see it there. Actually, oh yeah, in the last one, having a free earlobe is a phenotype because it's more dominant. Now, having unattached earlobes is a genotype. Now, adding a genotype and a phenotype is genetic makeup and genetic information. So basically, when you have these two together, you have a piece of genetic code, which is called genes. Now let's talk a little bit more about heredity. So, as I said before, heredity is the transmission of genetic factors from parents to offspring. The parent traits are passed down in a 50-50 split. So, let's say we have a mom. Her name is Laura. She has got blue eyes, BB, true recessive, that makes a dominant. Well, it doesn't really make it dominant, but it makes it a phenotype. And then we have her hair, that is BB, which is blonde, and well, two recessives make a phenotype. Sorry. Then the father, he's got brown eyes because Big B is more, well, I don't want to say important, but it's more dominant than Little B. And same for his hair. Big B is brown, and he could have gone blonde, but because Big B is bigger, well, he went with brown. Now they have 4 children. There's her first child, so she's a girl. She's the one in the left. Her name is Rachel. So Rachel, she heredited from her mom BB eyes. Okay? And then she got some BB hair. So how's this possible? Later we'll explain the formula, but she could come out possibly the same. Then we've got the second girl, which is Hiria. Now, Hiria, she's got blue eyes because of her mom, but she heredited her brown hair from her dad. Then we've got Johnny. Johnny's got brown eyes from his father and blonde hair from his mother. Lastly, this one is Toto. So, Toto, he's got brown eyes and brown hair, just like his dad. So, if you see, there's 2 that are exactly like their parents, and there's 2 that have a mix of both. Now, this is just a possible outcome. There can be many different outcomes. Well, you might have wondered how we calculated this. Now, of course, let's say a person has BB, blue eyes, in one part of their family, and which means their mom, and then Big B, Little B, from the father. Now, when we add Big B plus Little B, it's gonna be Big B with Little B, and so on with the other squares. Now, these things are called Punnett squares, which are used to predict the traits of the offspring. Now, you can also do this in different ways. So, there we have 2 examples. They're actually the same, but then how do we calculate, the amount of children? We could see that one could have, in the blue chart, one could have a brown eyes, another could have brown eyes, and the other could have blue eyes, and the last one could have blue eyes. This could be seen for 4 children. Now, if you're only calculating one, you might want to use percentages. So you see 50-50 split. Well, that means that the child has a possibility of having any trait. Now, Gregor Mendel is the father of genetics. So he was the one who did most research in genetics, and that's why we are here watching this video. Well, he experimented with pea plants, and don't think that only because we're humans and maybe we might be smarter than others, that doesn't mean that plants and animals don't have that too. They do actually. And pea plants are easy to cross-pollinate, which means you can easily pollinate one another so they can have a child, and they're easy to grow. In the example to the right, you can see that there is two traits, big A, big A, big B, and then small a, and small b, and small b. Now, I didn't mention this before, but sometimes you can have multiple traits in one group, and it represents the mother and father. Now, you can see how they cross-pollinated, how the first generation changed a little, and how the second generation did too. So you can understand that better, big A is yellow, big B is smooth, small a is green, and small b is wrinkled. Well, Gregor Mendel's complete name was Gregor Johann Mendel, or Johann Mendel. He was born in July 20, 1822, and he sadly died in January 6, 1884. Now, he studied a lot of things, such as, well, the pea plants, Mendelian inheritance, gene heredity, hybridization, a principle of independent assortment, and principle of segregation. So, lots of stuff. Anyways, we've also got alleles. In each chromosome, there are different groups. Different groups characterize different traits. Blue, in this case, well, I did a diagram, and the different groups are called loci, or locus, losos. Then blue is eye color, pink is hair color, and so on. I'll let you read that. Now, these are the parts in your chromosomes that are controlling specific traits. So there are two because each parent passes on down that loci that represents the same trait. In every single body, there's 46 chromosomes, and not always they're shaped like X's. Sometimes they're shaped like Y's. Now let's pass on to alleles part 2. Tommy needs our help in this example. So he's trying to calculate eye color, which could be blue or brown. And here, I did it. We helped them. In Punnett squares, well, first you put big B, then little b, little b. You combine them, and then you can see that there is a 50-50 chance of the child to have that trait. Now, don't worry, just pause the video and try to solve the other ones. And if you want, you could take a screenshot and write on the big chromosome. Lastly, as I said, but not least, we are going to look at heterozygous, homozygous, and dihybrid. So let's talk about BB. So big B, little b. When the traits you inherited from each parent are different. So that means that they're not the same. They do represent the same trait, but they are not the same in a dominant and recessive. Now, when you have big B and big B, or B and little b, it's when the traits you inherited from each parent are the same. And big B, and little e and big E, it's when you mix various traits together to make two traits look like one to analyze them. Now here there is homozygous mix and heterozygous mix. So when you have two of those and are looking at various traits, that's called a dihybrid or dihybrid. Well, that is all for today about genetics. Thank you for watching, and please keep watching. If you have any doubts, just look at other videos about cells or mutations or stuff like that. Now, mutations is for another video, but I'll see you later. Bye!